They expected humanity's first great leap into galactic technology to be teleporters. It seemed obvious. The alien empires had them, used them like breathing, and spoke of them with casual ease. Instant movement across stars, seamless trade, effortless war. Everyone thought that when humans finally caught up, they'd follow the same path. But that's not what happened. Instead, humanity chose something far more brutal, far more shocking, and far more terrifying. The first railgun shot tore through space like a thunderclap no one had ever heard before. It wasn't a beam of light, not a graceful teleporting maneuver, not some sleek alien energy trick. It was raw metal accelerated to impossible speed, slamming into a warship with such force that even shields, armor, and alien arrogance couldn't stand against it. That single impact changed the way the galaxy saw humanity. Suddenly, they weren't the backwater species still fumbling with outdated drives. They were the species that had just made the galaxy's most feared weapon look primitive. The truth is, humanity had been underestimated for centuries. The great empires thought humans would eventually mimic them, copy their technology step by step. But humans had a way of looking at things differently, of solving problems with what they had, rather than waiting for what others told them was the future. When teleportation seemed too unstable, too costly, and too alien, humanity turned its eyes to a simpler question. What if, instead of moving ourselves instantly, we simply moved destruction faster than anyone else could defend against? That was the birth of the railgun fleets. These ships were not elegant. They were massive brutes of steel, armed with cannons the size of towers, each designed to fling projectiles at near-relativistic speed. The aliens laughed at first. They called it outdated, barbaric, and inefficient. They called humans savages clinging to iron clubs while others wielded blades of light. But laughter turned to silence when the first battle came. An entire fleet of sleek, teleport-capable ships was reduced to burning wreckage in less than an hour. The railgun rounds ignored shields, tore through armor, and left survivors stunned at how something so primitive could destroy the most advanced navies in the galaxy. That was the day everything shifted. Humanity had announced itself not with the expected shimmer of teleportation gates, but with the thunder of mass drivers shaking the void. And the galaxy, for all its centuries of tradition, suddenly realized it had underestimated one thing: human stubbornness. Humans didn't care about elegance. They cared about survival, victory, and never again bowing to anyone else's rules. But it wasn't just about weapons. That first leap showed a pattern the galaxy would come to fear. Humans didn't follow the road others had laid down. They didn't walk the same technological path as the empires. They built their own, always unexpected, always disruptive. And railguns were just the first step. The terrifying part was that no one could predict what the second step would be. For the crews of those early railgun battleships, the memory of that first strike still burned in their minds. They were ordinary men and women, pulled from Earth's scattered colonies who had never expected to stand at the center of history. Some had grown up watching alien broadcasts that mocked humanity's weakness. Others had worked in mines, factories, or farms, never imagining they'd someday crew a weapon that could shake empires. Yet when the order came, when the railguns charged and the firing solution locked, every hand tightened on controls, every voice went silent, and every heart knew this was humanity's moment. And when the trigger was pulled, the galaxy learned that humans were not here to play catch-up. They were here to rewrite the rules, but victory brought more than glory. It brought fear. Overnight, the empires no longer saw humans as harmless latecomers. They saw them as a threat, unpredictable, unorthodox, and unwilling to follow the old paths. Whispers spread in alien courts. If humans could leap from crude drives to unstoppable railguns, what would they invent next? What were they hiding, and how long before those inventions reached the battlefield? This fear was both a weapon and a curse. Alliances shifted. Old enemies suddenly sought treaties with Earth, hoping to avoid being the next target. Others plotted in secret, believing that if humanity was not stopped early, it would one day dominate the stars. For humans, the pressure was immense. They had no teleporters, no great networks, no fleets to rival the galactic powers. All they had were their railguns, their ingenuity, and the fire in their hearts to never again be underestimated. And then the rumors began. Stories of something new being tested in hidden stations beyond the colonies. Some said it was teleportation, humanity's long-awaited leap to catch up. Others claimed it was something else, something no one could name. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the next chapter would be another weapon, another shock, another thunderclap that shattered expectations. For the officers aboard the flagship, the decision was clear. They could not stop. To hesitate was to give the empires time to recover, time to adapt, time to erase humanity's advantage. So even as railgun shells tore apart the night, human scientists and engineers worked without rest, searching for the next leap. The galaxy wanted teleporters. Humanity wanted something better. And when the test finally succeeded, when the impossible became possible in a flicker of light, the entire crew knew the galaxy would never be the same again, because railguns had been the warning. Teleporters, or what came after them, would be the revolution. But for now, the truth remained hidden. Humanity stood on the edge of its next leap, surrounded by allies who might be enemies and enemies who pretended to be friends. The fleets patrolled, the guns remained hot, and the whispers of a new technology spread faster than light. Everyone waited for the day when humans would reveal what they had been building in silence. And when that day came, the galaxy would have to ask itself a question it had avoided for too long. If railguns were only the beginning, what would humanity unleash next? The answer was closer than anyone realized. And when it came, it would not just shake the empires, it would shake the entire galaxy. The silence after the first railgun victories was not peace. It was the kind of silence that comes when predators circle each other, waiting to see who moves first. Humanity had bloodied the empires, had shown them that the old balance of power was not as secure as they thought. But no one believed for a second that the galaxy's rulers would let such an insult go unanswered. They had wealth, fleets, and centuries of experience in war. Humanity had only one weapon, one gamble, and one hope: to stay unpredictable. In the colonies, people lived with a mix of pride and dread. The broadcasts showed the first victories again and again, the flaming wreckage of ships that had once been called invincible. Children cheered, veterans saluted, and entire cities lit their nights with celebrations. But beneath the surface, whispers grew. If humanity had struck so hard, how long until the empires struck back? The railguns were powerful, yes, but could they stand against the combined might of civilizations that had ruled the stars for thousands of years? For every proud banner hung in the streets, there was a quiet glance skyward, wondering if tomorrow would bring retribution. Inside the fleets, the mood was sharper, more focused. The crews who had fired those first devastating shots were not basking in glory. They were training, testing, and preparing for the storm they knew was coming. Life aboard a railgun ship was not easy. The cannons required constant maintenance, their recoil stressed the very bones of the vessels, and ammunition had to be manufactured and transported in staggering quantities. Every sailor knew that in the vacuum of space, one failure could mean the end of not just their ship, but entire battle lines. Yet they pushed forward, driven by something deeper than orders. They knew the eyes of humanity were on them. They knew history had placed them at the edge of something greater. The commanders had no illusions. They had won battles, not wars. Their fleets were scattered, their logistics stretched, their enemies enraged. Already, alien diplomats arrived with thinly veiled threats, dressed in polite language but sharp enough to cut. Some promised annihilation if humans did not dismantle their railgun fleets. Others offered alliances that seemed too generous, too suspicious, as if trying to buy humanity's loyalty before crushing them later. Every council meeting on Earth grew more tense. Every debate weighed down with the same unspoken truth. The railguns had given them power, but they had also made them a target. And then there were the rumors, always the rumors. Whispers spread through the colonies about secret projects hidden beyond the reach of alien spies. Miners on the edge of asteroid belts spoke of convoys vanishing into black space, their cargoes never seen again. Engineers disappeared from their posts, reassigned to classified work, leaving behind families with no answers. On certain nights, distant flashes could be seen beyond the colony's patrol zones, brief sparks that didn't look like railgun fire. People asked questions, but no one in authority gave answers. For those close to the projects, secrecy was survival. The railguns had bought time, nothing more. Time to work, time to plan, time to build something that would ensure humanity was not just feared, but untouchable. The empires wanted to believe humans would eventually copy them, step into the same technologies, follow the same paths. That assumption was their weakness. Humanity would not walk their road. Humanity would carve its own, no matter how dangerous, no matter how uncertain. The scientists chosen for these hidden projects were not the galaxy's finest by alien standards. Many were seen as failures, dismissed by imperial academies, or too stubborn to fit neatly into alien ways of thinking. But on Earth and its colonies, that stubbornness was a strength. They didn't want perfect obedience. They wanted people who could look at the impossible and ask, why not? These were the people who had once turned crude mass drivers into weapons that terrified empires. Now they were asked to do something greater, but the price of this secrecy was heavy. Families wondered why their loved ones were gone for years. Commanders had to lie to their own crews, hiding truths that could never leave the ship. Some questioned if this was the right path, if by hiding in the dark, humanity was becoming the very thing it hated about the empires, secretive, manipulative, and ruthless. Yet every time doubt crept in, the memory of those first victories returned. If the railguns had been possible, then so was the next leap. And that leap, whatever it was, could not come too late. The empires were not idle. Intelligence reports spoke of their fleets gathering, not in open defiance, but in quiet, careful movements. Patrols doubled near human borders. Merchant lanes shifted. Training drills increased. They were preparing, not rushing. That was the most frightening part. They were waiting, studying, searching for the weak spot in humanity's armor. They were patient hunters, and humanity was the prey that had bitten back harder than expected. Everyone knew the counterstrike was coming, but no one knew when. Amid this tension, ordinary people carried on with their lives. Farmers still worked the soil of new colonies, teachers still taught children who dreamed of exploring the stars, and traders still carried goods across light years. But beneath it all, a strange resolve settled in. The people of Earth and its scattered worlds had seen what they were capable of. They knew now that their future was not to remain in the shadows of the empires. They could fight, they could win, and they could build something no one had imagined before. That hope, fragile as it was, burned brighter than fear, and in the secret stations hidden far beyond the colonies, something new was taking shape. The scientists whispered about equations that bent space in ways no alien theory had dared. The engineers tested machines that flickered with strange energy, machines that consumed power in terrifying amounts but hinted at possibilities greater than teleportation. The crews who maintained security at these stations didn't know what was being built, only that it was important enough to die for. Each day, more pieces came together, and each night, the question grew louder in the minds of those who knew. If this worked, what would it mean for humanity? The galaxy was waiting, watching, and whispering. The railguns had been a warning. But humanity's next leap was being forged in silence, and when it arrived, it would not only change battles. It would change the very foundation of galactic power. What no one outside those hidden halls could see was that the work was close, too close. The prototypes were dangerous, unstable, but promising in ways that defied logic. One more breakthrough, one more push, and the secret would no longer be contained. Soon, the fleets, the empires, and the entire galaxy would learn the truth. And when that moment came, humanity would not ask permission. It would not wait for the galaxy's approval. It would unleash the next thunderclap. The hidden stations had grown into entire floating cities of steel and secrecy. From the outside, they looked like simple refueling depots or abandoned mining platforms. But deep within their armored shells, the heartbeat of humanity's most dangerous gamble echoed. Day and night blurred as teams of engineers, scientists, and technicians pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, fueled only by caffeine, adrenaline, and the weight of knowing the galaxy's fate rested in their hands. The railguns had given humanity a seat at the table. But everyone inside those walls knew the next move would determine whether they kept it or were erased. The main conflict wasn't only between humanity and the empires outside. It was also within. Arguments raged behind closed doors. Some leaders believed humanity should consolidate, fortify its colonies, and dig in with the railguns, trusting brute strength to hold the line. Others demanded that the new project, whatever it became, must be revealed soon to frighten the empires into hesitation. And then there were those who urged caution, warning that humanity's obsession with speed and surprise could backfire, unleashing a technology too dangerous even for themselves. Each side claimed to speak for survival, but the truth was, no one knew what survival would look like in a galaxy this unforgiving. For the men and women aboard the fleets, the conflict was more personal. Every patrol was a test of nerves. Railgun crews watched alien ships linger just outside weapons range, their scanners probing, their intentions unclear. Tense standoffs stretched for hours, sometimes days, until one side finally drifted away. No shots fired, no battles joined, just the constant knowledge that a spark could ignite everything. Many sailors wrote letters to their families during those long silences, never sure if the next shift would be their last. Some admitted fear, others promised victory, but all shared the same haunting question. Was humanity ready for the storm they had unleashed? The empires, for their part, were not united either. Intelligence officers reported fractures among them, old rivalries straining under the weight of humanity's sudden rise. Some argued for crushing Earth immediately before its new weapons spread. Others worried that such an attack would unite humanity even further, forging them into an enemy that could not be easily defeated. A few whispered that perhaps humans could be useful, dangerous allies against rival powers. But alliances built on fear were fragile, and everyone knew that trust was a currency no one could afford to spend. Within the secret research projects, tension reached a breaking point. The scientists had achieved something incredible, something none of the empires believed was possible without centuries of study. They had bent space, not fully, not safely, but enough to glimpse a path forward. Yet success bred danger. One failed test had already destroyed an entire chamber, vaporizing steel and leaving behind a distortion in space that flickered like a wound in reality. The technicians who witnessed it spoke in hushed voices afterward, their eyes distant, as if they had looked into something that should not exist. And still, the work continued. For the people guarding these stations, the conflict was one of secrecy. They lived with the constant threat of discovery. Alien spies were everywhere, hidden among traders, diplomats, and even within neutral colonies. Every ship that approached could carry an infiltrator. Every signal could be a leak. Soldiers scanned, searched, and interrogated. But doubt always remained. How long could they keep the project hidden? How long before an empire found proof and decided to strike before humanity's next leap was complete? Back on Earth, ordinary citizens felt the weight of these hidden battles. Prices rose as resources vanished into classified convoys. Families wondered why loved ones had been reassigned without explanation. Rumors of weapons that could tear holes in the stars spread through underground channels, half believed, half feared. Some celebrated, convinced that humanity was finally strong enough to break free from the empires forever. Others protested, warning that humanity was rushing into a war it could not win, building machines it could not control. The streets of major cities echoed with both cheers and cries, a reflection of a people caught between pride and dread. Among the fleets, a subplot unfolded quietly. A young officer commanding her first patrol noticed strange readings during a border run. They weren't enemy ships, at least not in the traditional sense. They were anomalies, flickers of space where sensors failed, where signals bent oddly as if something was interfering just beyond detection. At first, she thought it was a glitch. But as the weeks went on, the patterns grew clearer. Someone, somewhere, was testing something. Something eerily similar to the distortions reported in humanity's own secret stations. The question that chilled her was simple. Had the empires already caught up? Or worse, had they been working on this technology long before humanity stumbled upon it? This discovery was passed up the chain quietly, hidden even from some in command. Fear of leaks was too great, and paranoia spread. If the empires were experimenting too, then humanity's advantage might not last. If humanity had only bought time, then time was slipping away faster than anyone admitted. At the same moment, whispers of sabotage began to ripple through the research stations. Small accidents at first, a power conduit overloaded, a shipment of materials delayed, a single line of corrupted data in an otherwise flawless sequence. Each incident could be explained, dismissed as human error, but as they stacked up, a darker suspicion grew. Someone inside might be working against them. A spy, a traitor, or perhaps someone who simply feared what they were building. Suspicion poisoned friendships, broke apart old alliances, and made every worker wonder if the person beside them could be the one undoing everything. And all the while, the galaxy's gaze pressed closer. Alien fleets maneuvered just outside human borders, like wolves testing the edges of a campfire's light. Diplomatic messages grew sharper, promises of peace laced with threats of annihilation. Every council meeting ended in shouting matches. Every new report brought fresh dread. Humanity had made its first leap with the railguns, but now it stood at a precipice, staring into the unknown, surrounded by enemies who would not forgive or forget. The unresolved conflict was everywhere, inside the fleets, inside the colonies, inside the very hearts of the people. Victory had given humanity pride, but also a target painted on its back. The secret projects promised salvation, but also the possibility of disaster greater than anything the empires could unleash. And in the shadows of space, anomalies flickered like distant warnings, hinting that humanity was not the only one walking this dangerous road. No one knew when the first true strike would come. No one knew which empire would make the move, or if humanity itself would falter before then. But everyone felt it in their bones. The next clash would not just decide battles. It would decide the future of the galaxy itself, and humanity, for all its ingenuity, had no guarantee that it was ready. The warning signs were impossible to ignore now. Everyday patrol fleets reported new movements near the borders. Alien ships no longer lingered passively. They probed deeper, testing human reactions with sudden incursions and shadowing convoys. Railgun crews kept their fingers on the triggers, tense and sleepless, knowing that one wrong move could unleash a storm that would consume them all. Commanders barked orders through clenched jaws, trying to hold their crews together with discipline while privately admitting that the noose was tightening. Humanity's railguns had shocked the galaxy, but that shock was wearing off. The empires were adapting. The secret stations felt the pressure most. The experiments had reached a dangerous stage, where every test carried the risk of catastrophe. One chamber imploded during a trial, bending metal like paper and leaving a scar in the station's hull. The workers survived, but the message was clear. What they were building could not be controlled by half measures. Engineers debated endlessly, arguing whether the power source was stable enough, whether the calculations accounted for every variable. But the truth gnawed at all of them. They didn't have time to perfect it. The fleets needed results now. The Council demanded something to show, a weapon or a breakthrough that would keep humanity ahead before the empires struck. At the same time, whispers of sabotage grew louder. Another shipment went missing. Another data cluster was corrupted. Security teams tightened their grip, interrogating workers, scanning communications, tearing apart cabins in search of evidence. Trust dissolved and the atmosphere thickened with suspicion. Some swore it was alien spies. Others accused their own colleagues of cowardice or treachery. The paranoia was so strong that even the most loyal engineers wondered if they were being watched, if every misstep would be treated as betrayal. And all the while, the experiments pressed forward, each success dragging them closer to a test that might shatter not just the station, but the fragile balance of the galaxy itself. Back on Earth, the divide among the people sharpened. Some marched in the streets with banners raised high, demanding that the government unleash the new weapon, whatever it was, before the empires could act. Others shouted just as loud, warning that humanity was playing with forces it didn't understand, and that arrogance could doom them all. Families of missing scientists gathered outside government buildings, begging for answers. Traders complained that convoys were disappearing into classified black zones. News networks filled their broadcasts with speculation, each one more extreme than the last. Was humanity on the brink of ascension or annihilation? No one knew, and that uncertainty was worse than any clear threat. Within the fleets, tension became unbearable. One railgun ship reported an incident that spread like wildfire among the crews. During a patrol, they locked onto a group of alien vessels, shadowing them. For hours, neither side fired. Then, without warning, the alien ships vanished. Not retreated, vanished. Scanners showed nothing, no jump signatures, no energy trails. It was as if they had simply stepped out of existence. When the ship returned to base and reported the encounter, analysts dismissed it as sensor failure. But the crew swore it was real. Whispers spread. The Empires weren't just preparing their counterstrike. They were already testing something beyond human understanding. That rumor reached the secret stations quickly. It confirmed the worst fears of the scientists, that they weren't racing alone. The anomalies they had detected weren't accidents or natural phenomena. They were glimpses of the Empire's own projects, shadows of experiments humanity had thought only they were daring enough to attempt. The realization struck hard. If the Empires were ahead, then humanity's only hope was to risk everything, to accelerate their own tests no matter the danger. Failure would mean destruction, but hesitation would mean defeat. The decision came late one night. The lead commander of the project gathered the exhausted team, voices low, eyes hollow from weeks without rest. They would move to a full-scale test. No more simulations, no more controlled trials. They would attempt the first activation of the prototype. The risks were enormous. If it failed, the station could be destroyed, killing everyone aboard. But if it succeeded, it would give humanity the proof it needed to stand against the galaxy. Word spread quietly through the corridors. Workers whispered goodbyes to friends, wrote final notes to families, and sealed them away in personal lockers. Security doubled patrols, not just against spies, but against panic. Everyone knew the next hours could mark the turning point of history, or the end of it. Meanwhile, the fleets tightened their positions around the borders, forming a shield of steel and railguns. Reports showed alien fleets converging in greater numbers, massing in silence just beyond human space. It was clear now that the Empires were preparing for a strike. Humanity had only days, perhaps hours, before the first shot would be fired. Commanders gave speeches to their crews, voices firm but faces pale. They reminded them of the first victories, of the pride of Earth, of the strength that came from never backing down. But when the speeches ended, silence returned, and every sailor returned to their post with the same thought. Would the railguns be enough this time? The young officer who had first detected the anomalies now found herself haunted by them. She reviewed the data again and again, searching for patterns, for any clue about what the Empires had built. Each flicker of distortion looked eerily similar to the readings from the human prototypes. She realized with a chill that the Empires might already have something operational. If so, humanity's test wasn't about gaining an advantage. It was about catching up before it was too late. She filed her report, but it was buried under the flood of urgent messages. The Council had already placed its hopes entirely in the secret stations. In those stations, the prototype stood ready at last. A towering structure of coils, chambers, and conduits, pulsing with restrained energy, it seemed less like a machine and more like something alive, waiting to be unleashed. The engineers ran final checks, voices shaking, hands trembling as they confirmed the sequences. Soldiers stood guard at every entrance, weapons ready, eyes scanning the shadows for signs of betrayal. In the control chamber, the countdown began. Outside, in the cold silence of space, alien fleets moved closer. Human patrols tracked them, railguns charged, ammunition loaded. Signals flooded in, encrypted messages racing between fleets and Earth, warning that the borders would not hold for long. The first skirmishes had already begun. Brief exchanges of fire, railgun shells slamming into alien shields, retaliatory bursts of plasma scorching the void. Nothing decisive yet, but everyone knew these were the opening notes of something much larger. The tension rose with every passing second. On Earth, crowds gathered around public screens, waiting for news. In the colonies, families huddled together, praying for safety. In the fleets, sailors gripped controls until their knuckles turned white. And in the secret station, the countdown ticked lower and lower, each number echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. The prototype hummed, lights flaring across its surface as energy surged into the core. Instruments flickered wildly, readings spiking beyond predictions. Some shouted for the test to be aborted. Others demanded it continue. The commander gave no order to stop. The moment had come, and just as the final second ticked away, alarms blared across the fleets. Alien ships were on the move, formations shifting into attack. The skies along the border lit with fire as the first true battle erupted. Humanity's railguns thundered again, hurling destruction into the void. But this time, the enemy did not scatter. They pressed forward, shields burning, weapons blazing, determined to crush humanity once and for all. In the secret station, the final sequence engaged. The machine roared with power, space itself bending, twisting, groaning as if reality resisted what humanity was about to do. The crew held their breath, eyes wide, as the impossible began to unfold before them, and then silence. A heartbeat before revelation. The silence after the machine's activation was worse than the roar of its power. For one fragile moment, every person in the control chamber thought it had failed. The prototype had screamed with energy, space had twisted at the edges of vision, and then it had all gone still. Some lowered their heads, thinking it was over, that the gamble had failed and humanity's last chance had collapsed. But then the instruments flickered back to life. Not in error, not in chaos, reporting readings no one had ever seen before. Space around the station was no longer stable. It was bending, pulsing, as if something massive had been pulled close, but remained just out of sight. The commander gave the order to continue, though his voice shook. The project had worked, or at least it had done something, and that something was terrifying. The prototype had not just bent space, it had torn it. A fracture spread outward from the station like a ripple in water, a shimmering wound visible even to the naked eye through the viewing ports. The stars beyond it seemed to stretch unnaturally, warping in ways that made the mind ache. The crew whispered in awe and fear. They had wanted teleportation. What they had created was something far stranger. Reports flooded in almost immediately from the fleets patrolling nearby. Alien ships had picked up the anomaly. They were changing course, accelerating toward the coordinates of the station. The empires had been waiting for a sign of humanity's secret project, and now they had it. The prototype wasn't just a weapon or a tool. It was a beacon, blazing across the galaxy, calling out to every enemy who feared what humans might unleash. Panic rippled through the station. Some begged to shut it down before it attracted even more attention. Others insisted they push forward, that the proof of concept was too valuable to abandon. The fracture continued to grow, humming with unstable energy, and the engineers argued whether it could collapse on its own or spiral into something uncontrollable. The commander silenced them with a single order: hold the line. The fleets would have to buy them the time to stabilize or exploit the anomaly, whatever it turned out to be. But the fleets were already stretched to their limits. Along the border, railgun fire thundered into advancing alien formations, tearing apart ships but not slowing their momentum. For every enemy vessel destroyed, 2 more pushed forward. Human crews fought with desperate precision, their railguns glowing white from constant firing, ammunition stores dwindling. They had always known the railguns were humanity's edge, but now, under the relentless pressure of united imperial fleets, even that edge seemed to dull. And as reports of the anomaly spread, the enemy only pressed harder, desperate to strike before the humans could finish what they had started. Then came the second shock. The anomaly was not empty. Scanners picked up faint signals within the distortion. Faint, but undeniable. Something was moving inside the fracture, shapes that weren't supposed to exist in ordinary space. At first, the scientists thought it was an echo, a reflection caused by the warping of signals. But the readings grew stronger, clearer. Whatever the prototype had created, it was not just a tear. It was a doorway. And something on the other side was beginning to notice. The crew stared at the distorted silhouettes appearing at the edge of the fracture. They were massive, unfamiliar, and wrong. Structures or vessels that didn't match any alien empire in the database. Some whispered that the empires must have already developed similar technology and were using the fracture against humanity. Others whispered something worse, that this was not the work of the empires at all. That humanity had opened a door into a part of the universe no one had dared to touch. The commander demanded silence, but the fear was impossible to contain. If humanity had created a weapon, the galaxy would rally to destroy it. If they had created a doorway and something else was waiting beyond, then no one could predict what would emerge. The scientists scrambled to analyze the signals, voices frantic as they argued over whether to stabilize or collapse the fracture. But the truth was clear. Stopping it might be just as dangerous as letting it grow. Word of the discovery leaked faster than any security measure could contain. Within hours, both Earth and the colonies were in chaos. News feeds blared reports of a gate to the unknown, while alien broadcasts condemned humanity as reckless children tampering with forces beyond their comprehension. Crowds filled the streets again, some demanding the anomaly be used as a weapon to frighten the empires, others terrified that humanity had unleashed a threat none of them could control, and the empires reacted exactly as feared. Their fleets accelerated, no longer probing, no longer cautious. They surged toward human space with the urgency of predators sensing weakness. To them, it no longer mattered if humanity had built a weapon or a doorway. What mattered was that humanity had crossed a line no one else had dared. That alone was unforgivable. In the fleets, morale teetered on the edge. Sailors whispered that they weren't fighting just the empires anymore. They were fighting the unknown itself. Yet they fought harder than ever, railguns slamming round after round into advancing ships, shields flashing as alien vessels exploded into burning fragments. But for every victory, the pressure mounted. Ammunition was running low, casualties were climbing, and still the anomaly grew. Back in the station, the fracture pulsed with a light that was not natural, a rhythm that seemed to beat in time with something unseen. The scientists realized with horror that the shapes inside the anomaly were not drifting randomly. They were moving closer. The fracture was becoming a bridge, not just a wound. Something was trying to cross. The commander faced an impossible choice. Shut down the prototype and risk the fracture collapsing violently, possibly consuming the entire sector. Or let it continue, gambling that whatever came through could be controlled, or at least delayed long enough to weaponize. He said nothing at first, only staring into the shifting light beyond the viewing port, knowing the weight of history rested on his next word. And in that silence, the second plot twist revealed itself. The anomaly wasn't growing randomly. It was responding. The prototype hadn't opened the fracture on its own. It had been answered. Someone, or something, on the other side had recognized the signal and was pulling it wider, pulling it closer. Humanity hadn't just built a weapon or discovered a new frontier. They had knocked on a door, and now something was opening it from the other side. The room erupted into chaos, voices shouting, instruments spiking as the readings surged off the charts. The fracture's glow deepened, shadows taking clearer form within its light. The fleets outside screamed warnings over comms, alien ships breaking off their attack as if they too realized something had changed. For the first time, the empires hesitated, not because of humanity, but because of what was about to arrive. The station trembled as the fracture pulsed, a deep vibration running through its hull like a heartbeat. Lights flickered, alarms wailed, and every soul aboard realized the same truth. Humanity had set out to build railguns to survive, to leap toward teleporters to compete. But instead, they had stumbled into something beyond the comprehension of empires or species. The fracture was not just a creation, it was a summons. And now, something was answering. The fracture pulsed like a living thing, stretching wider with every heartbeat, until the stars themselves seemed to bend toward it. The entire station rattled under the strain, groaning as if metal and steel were being pulled into a shape not meant to exist. Through the shimmering distortion, the silhouettes became clearer. Vast structures, jagged and immense, shaped like no ship or station the galaxy had ever seen, edged closer with each surge of energy. Every soul on the station knew, without needing confirmation, that something was coming through. Humanity had asked a question of the universe, and now the answer was arriving. The fleets on both sides faltered. Alien warships that had moments ago been pushing forward with ruthless aggression slowed their assault, their formations breaking. Some even veered away, unwilling to come too close to the growing anomaly. For the first time in this long war, humans and aliens alike stared into the same horizon with fear. The fracture was no longer a human secret. It was now a universal crisis. The commander stood frozen before the viewing port, his hands gripping the rail so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Behind him, his officers shouted competing advice. Shut it down, hold the connection, fire everything they had into the anomaly to disrupt its growth. But the commander ignored them. He was staring into the light, into the silhouettes forming within, and he realized what few others had yet considered. The things moving on the other side weren't ships. They weren't machines. They were alive. The realization spread like wildfire as the images resolved into monstrous shapes of impossible scale. Their movements were deliberate, coordinated, and their eyes, or something like eyes, burned faintly within the haze. The fracture had not opened into another dimension of resources or technologies. It had opened into a place where titans slept, and those titans had noticed the knock. The railguns of the human fleets roared to life first, not aimed at the aliens this time, but at the fracture itself. White-hot slugs tore across the void, smashing into the distortion, trying to destabilize it. The impact sent ripples across its surface, but it did not close. Instead, it seemed to feed on the energy, growing stronger, brighter. The alien fleets, sensing the same danger, joined in, their plasma bursts and beam weapons lashing the anomaly in a desperate attempt to shut the doorway. For the first time in history, humanity and its enemies fought side by side, not against each other but against the unknown. The commander seized the moment. He barked orders with the clarity of a man who had no choice left but to gamble everything. The prototype had opened the fracture, and the prototype would have to close it. The scientists scrambled, rerouting power, overloading circuits, pushing the machine to its limit. Sparks flew across the control room as consoles overloaded, and the entire station shook as if resisting its own commands. The fracture pulsed faster, each beat heavier, like the approach of a drum summoning giants. Outside, the fleet screamed warnings. One of the shapes inside had pressed against the barrier, its massive form straining against the edge of space. For a moment, its surface broke through, a vast limb of darkness stretching into normal space before snapping back as if the barrier was not yet fully open. The sight alone was enough to drive terror into even the most hardened captains. They realized that if even one of those beings crossed into their galaxy, there would be no fighting it. No fleet, no empire, no weapon could resist. The scientists yelled that they needed more time. The power wasn't enough to reverse the process. They couldn't close the fracture completely, not while it was being pulled open from the other side. But then came the unexpected twist. The anomaly's energy began to sync with the prototype. The shapes inside weren't just pulling, they were responding. The fracture wasn't a simple door. It was a connection, a bridge between two civilizations. And it wasn't just being forced, it was being invited. The commander realized the horrifying truth. Humanity had not discovered a weapon. They had announced themselves. And the things on the other side were answering because they recognized something familiar in the signal. They were reaching back not to conquer, but to connect. The decision was immediate and impossible. He could order the scientists to overload the prototype completely, burning out the station and collapsing the fracture in a violent implosion that could cost thousands of lives, but might seal the breach forever. Or he could hold the connection, risk contact, and gamble that the beings beyond were not as hostile as they appeared. The crew watched him in silence, every breath held. Knowing history itself balanced on his word, he gave the order to collapse it. The prototype screamed with power as every reserve of energy was thrown into its core. The lights dimmed across the station, then went black, the only illumination the searing glow of the fracture outside. The machine groaned under the strain, metal melting, conduits bursting into flames. The fracture pulsed erratically, its rhythm breaking, the titans beyond pressing harder as if sensing their connection slipping. One of them roared, or something like roaring, a vibration so deep it rattled bones and made blood run cold. The fleets poured everything they had into the anomaly, blasting it with relentless fire until the stars themselves seemed lost behind the storm. The fracture shuddered, its light flickering, its edges tearing apart. And then, with a final surge of power, the prototype detonated. The blast consumed the station in light. The fracture writhed, collapsing inward, dragging debris, fire, and the remnants of the prototype into its heart. The silhouettes inside thrashed, their forms distorting, their roars fading as the wound in space sealed shut. And then it was gone. Just stars, cold, empty space, silence. The fleets drifted in stunned quiet. Humanity and its enemies, locked in battle only hours before, now floated side by side in the aftermath of what none of them fully understood. Messages crackled across comms, orders to regroup, calls for truce, demands for answers. No one knew what to say. For the first time, the galaxy had faced something larger than war, and it had taken all of them together to survive it. On Earth, the news spread in waves of relief and fear. The fracture was gone, but the memory of what had tried to come through would never fade. Crowds filled the streets once more, not in protest or celebration, but in silence, staring at the skies, wondering what else lay beyond. The alien empires, too, were shaken. Their broadcasts no longer mocked humanity. They spoke cautiously now, some even calling for negotiations, recognizing that the humans had stumbled into something even they feared. But the final twist came quietly, almost unnoticed. Weeks later, as engineers sifted through the wreckage of the station, they recovered fragments of the prototype. Most were fused and useless, burned beyond recognition. But one small shard of the core still glowed faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as the fracture once had. And deep within that shard, faint but undeniable, came a signal. Not random static, not noise, a message. The Titans on the other side hadn't been destroyed. They had heard humanity, and now they were waiting for an answer. The shard pulsed softly in the engineer's hands, its rhythm steady, almost like a heartbeat. Word of it spread quickly through the command councils, across colonies, and into the halls of alien governments. At first there was panic, whispers that the fracture wasn't truly gone, that the Titans might return at any moment. But as scientists studied the fragment, the truth became harder to ignore. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't unstable. It was a signal, repeating itself in patterns that carried structure, intent, and, most unsettling of all, something that sounded like language. The commander who had given the order to destroy the prototype stood in front of the council weeks later, the weight of those final moments still etched on his face. He spoke not with triumph, but with caution. "We did not defeat what lay beyond the fracture," he said. "We delayed it. We caught its attention. And now, it is watching us." His words carried across every listening channel, human and alien alike. The silence that followed was not filled with fear, but with the heavy truth that none could deny: the galaxy had changed. The war that had been tearing humanity and the empires apart slowed to a halt. The fleets, still scarred from their last stand at the anomaly, held their fire. Diplomats, once dismissed as background noise to endless battles, suddenly became the most vital voices in the galaxy. Truces were signed, if not out of trust, then out of necessity. Humanity had shown that its railguns could rewrite the balance of power. But the fracture had shown something greater, that all their wars meant nothing compared to the giants waiting beyond. For the people of Earth and the colonies, life carried on, but not as it had before. Families looked at the night sky with new eyes, wondering if the stars hid watchers far older than the empires they feared. Children asked their parents about the Titans, and no one could offer answers. Factories continued to build railguns and ships, but they also began constructing observatories, listening stations, and research centers dedicated to the shard's signal. Humanity was preparing, not just for war, but for understanding. The scientists who had worked on the prototype were no longer seen as reckless. They were seen as both the saviors and the ones who had brought danger to their doorstep. Some retired in guilt, unable to bear the weight of what they had unleashed. Others pressed on, determined to unlock the shard's secrets before the Titans returned. They spoke of harmonics, of frequencies that seemed to echo human brainwaves as though the signal was designed not just to communicate, but to resonate. The possibility lingered that the beings beyond had not stumbled on humanity by chance. They had recognized something in them. Among the alien empires, the fracture changed everything. Old rivalries dulled in the face of the memory of that colossal limb pressing through the anomaly. Leaders who had once mocked humanity for its primitive weapons now sought their counsel, asking how railguns had been turned into something that could threaten the unthinkable. Though suspicion remained, there was a quiet acknowledgement that humanity had forced everyone to see the galaxy differently. The humans had not just survived, they had forced even the most advanced species to admit that survival was fragile for them all. For the commander and his crew, the aftermath was not one of celebration, but reflection. They had seen the Titan's eyes, felt their roar shake the marrow in their bones, and knew the truth no report could soften. The galaxy was not the top of the chain. They had peered over the edge and found something deeper, something far older. Some of the crew turned to faith, believing they had glimpsed gods. Others turned to fear, dreading the day the Titans would return. But most turned to resolve. If they were coming, humanity would not face them unprepared. Time passed, but the shard never stopped pulsing. Its glow became the heartbeat of a new era, a reminder that the universe was larger than their wars, and that their choices would define how the Titans judged them. Humanity did not abandon its weapons. They refined them, building railguns larger and more powerful than ever, testing new technologies inspired by the wreckage of the prototype. But alongside those weapons, they built the beginnings of something new. Not teleporters, not gates, but something untested, something born from the shard's patterns. A bridge of understanding, fragile and uncertain, but theirs alone. The final reports from the engineers concluded that the signal was not hostile. It was curious. It was waiting. But no one could say how long the Titans would wait or what they truly wanted. That uncertainty bound humanity and the empires in a fragile peace. For the first time in centuries, there were no great wars, only preparation, research, and whispers of the day the fracture might open again. The commander often returned to the observation deck, standing alone before the stars. He had ordered the fracture closed, knowing it saved lives, but also knowing it had not ended anything. He thought of the roar, of the limb pressing through, of the message still echoing faintly in the shard. He wondered if the Titans were watching him even now, wondering why he had slammed the door shut, wondering what humanity would do next. And in those quiet hours, he realized something that gave him both fear and hope. The Titans had answered humanity because humanity had dared to knock. No other species had risked building what humans had built. No other species had been reckless or bold enough to send that signal into the void. Perhaps that was why the Titans had responded. Perhaps they saw in humanity the same hunger, the same refusal to wait for someone else to show the way. The galaxy had always believed that teleporters were the crown jewel of progress, the natural step for any species seeking greatness. Humanity had shown otherwise. Railguns had given them power, the fracture had given them perspective, and the shard pulsing in their hands gave them a future both terrifying and full of promise. The wars with the empires might one day resume, old grudges flaring as always, but for now, the memory of the Titans held them back. They all knew the truth. There were bigger battles waiting, battles no empire could fight alone. Humanity, once underestimated, had become the center of that truth. And whether the Titans returned as friends or enemies, humanity would face them, not with fear, but with the same stubborn defiance that had carried them this far. As the commander turned away from the stars one final time, he felt no triumph and no despair. Only clarity. Humanity had taken its first step into a galaxy far larger than anyone had imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, full of shadows and questions without answers. But one thing was certain. When the Titans knocked again, humanity would be ready to answer.